So, and that's not the best way to start the morning and the presentation. So, just to use this this morning and this presentation, I wanted to show you the result of a public policy that I designed for the European Union Committee of the Regions, because I think that's the kind of document that can guide in some way also the drafting of local and regional regulations around Europe, because it's a public policy document that is in a way, let's say, an umbrella regulation that could inspire local regulators and local activists to understand many things about sharing economy and to understand how to use sharing economy in the proper way to foster local economic development. In order to understand better, the kind of guiding principles of this public policy, this European public policy, I have to make a brief introduction, theoretical introduction, on the concept of sharing that can be extracted from the theories of around the commons. So you see here two pictures of two women, and you're going to see that this is a sort of pattern that sharing and commons has a lot to do with let's say a feminist approach to how you design public policy, because as you're going to see in a little while, I use this as also a presupposition, a principle to redesign and to talk about this new economic agent which is the rise. So you see on the left Elinor Ostrom, and on the right Carol Rose. You might be more familiar with Elinor Ostrom than Carol Rose. How many of you do you know who Elinor Ostrom is? Only one person? Two? Only two? How many of you know who Carol Rose is? Zero. Okay, so it's, it's the stats, it works well as well. So Elinor Ostrom was a Nobel Prize winner in economy for economy in 2009. She won the Nobel Prize because she studied the commons, and she showed that these shared resources, and mainly we are talking about natural resources, are better governed if you embrace the idea of cooperation rather than competition, which is the kind of principle that governs today's regulation around natural resources. If you think about also economic incentive schemes and regulations around the environment, the air, the fact that we have permissions to emit pollution, basically. So think about a natural resource that is open access, is non-rival, is non-excludable in a sense that everybody can take some of the resource without paying anything or without being preventing from getting and extracting and subtracting the resource. Think about a pasture and the possibility for herdsmen to bring their cattle to the pasture. It's open access, and everybody can bring more cows, to the pasture to use it and to extract resource. So this, according to the theory of the tragedy of the commons, because nobody, in some way nobody sustains the cost of the use of the resource, can ultimately end up distracting the resource, because everybody has, the so-called free riding approach. Everybody knowing that he or she can use the resource more, is going to use the resource more up until to the point where the resource is distracted, because if everybody reason in the same way, you end up deploying the resource. You end up distracting the resource because the resource has a limited renewability limit. So this is the tragedy of the commons. Nobody is willing to really cooperate. And this is actually true up to a point. It's true if you think about the economic agent as an economic agent that can only be the self-interested, egoistic homo economicus, the economic man that the economists have talked about over centuries now. But we know, and that was actually the work that Elinor Ostrom did, that we know now that this is not always true. It's not always true that the economic agent is an agent that is motivated only by self-interest. That there are cases, and Elinor Ostrom showed that there are cases in which people cooperate, do not compete, try to preserve the resource, come up with governance and rules and institutions that preserve the resource from being distracted, agreeing upon by agreeing on a certain set of rules and norms in order to prevent the tragedy from happening. And as I said, this was, and Elinor Ostrom was very smart and very well in outlining all the conditions, the so-called design principles that in some way can help communities defining these rules, because if you follow, she extracted from these case studies that she talked about in this book from 1990 called Governing the Commons, some design principles, some guidance that can be used to design these regulations. But the point that I want to make is that these resources are congestible resources. So these are resources in which, in fact, if you have more people using the resource without having a cooperative or a cooperative regime of use of the resource, then you end up destroying the resource. Carol Rose talked about another kind of commons, another kind of shareable resource, and she called them the open commons. So these open commons are commons in which you kinda do not have to just share the resource, because the resource is also a constructed resource. It's a resource that is socially constructed. You need actually the action of people to produce the resource. Think about digital culture. Think about culture in itself. Think about even cultural heritage and how you could regenerate or recreate cultural activities within it. Think about Wikipedia as a knowledge commons. Think about Linux as a software that is co-created by community. So in some way, this is what, of course, Carol Rose wrote about this when Linux was not there and Wikipedia was not there, but she talked about the possibility that, if you have more people collaborating and co-producing, then you produce open commons. So the more the merrier. You have the comedy of the commons. It's not the tragedy, it's not the distraction, it's actually the preservation and the regeneration and the generation of new commons. So I want you to focus on these two sets of commons, because I think that this can guide you and can guide us in understanding better this idea of sharing and pooling in the city, as I said. Because these are the two kind of, the dichotomy for now, that we could use to actually guide also the action and the design of regulation on the commons. So and this was kind of the approach that we used in drafting this European public policy on sharing economy, on the local and regional dimension of the sharing economy. So we need first to understand that there are two layers. One is, the global sharing economy, and the other one is the local sharing economy. And the global kind of built on the inner workings of this local sharing economy, and the work of people that share and collaborate to produce, to preserve congestible commons from the destruction, and to co-produce collaborative commons and open commons and generative commons. So the first thing that we said was, we need to understand that there is not just sharing, no? There is also collaboration and cooperation. And that, of course, this is creating a new economic agent. So it's not anymore the homo economicus, it's not anymore someone who is only, as I said before, interested by his or her own self-interest, but there is also maybe a new model, a new economic agent on the rise that is trying to produce or preserve common resources in a different way from the past. And of course, sharing economy has another feature that, at least this version of sharing economy, which is the platform approach. What we mean by platform approach is the fact that, differently from happened in the past, relations are more important than before. Trust, reciprocity, is more important than and non-economic motives are more important than in the old paradigm, in the old economic paradigm, which is a competitive paradigm, no? The other thing is the use of digital technologies from one side. So the fact that most of these forms of sharing economy are enabled by technologies, but what we said is also that this does not have to happen only in the digital sphere, in the digital space. It is also a phenomenon that is happening in the real world, without sometimes, as you know better than me, and many of the examples that are here on display show that it's also a social technology rather than a digital technology. That sharing is also about all these co-working spaces, co-living spaces, and all these physical platforms in which people with an approach, a peer-to-peer approach, a collaborative approach, are not only sharing, but also co-producing new externalities, new commons. Even social cohesion, solidarity, social justice should be considered as a commons. So we need to also be aware that sharing can be, a social technology, a digital technology, and we know better than we know that this is kind of the main attention of media falls on this, on just one side of the sharing economy, the market-based sharing economy. So the sharing economy that is still using the homo economicus as an economic agent, and it's only using sharing as a form, maybe sometimes just as a form of communication strategy. But it's really a market base. It's still an hierarchical economic structure, and so it does not have much to do with the other social-based models of sharing economy that we have been talking so far. So to go back, so I want to make 3 points today. The first one is about the agent, the subject and the actor of this new economic paradigm, which, as I said, is not anymore the consumer. Of course, there is it's not anymore just someone who is buying services or goods. It's someone that is co-producing, commoning, is transforming herself into, a real economic agent in which, it's self, driven, and it's not a mere economic actor. It's someone that is concerned also with she's concerned also with the kind of social values and social externalities that an economic activity can produce. So, and of course, this is blurring the lines between consumption and production, but this is only just one, the tip of the iceberg. It's not just about this, and this is not just, we need to make sure that this is, communicated in a proper way. It's not just Airbnb and Uber, which are using digital platforms and are, saying that it's not, there is no distinction between consumption and production. It's more complex, and that is so there is a new economic identity in which an individual unwilling to act alone would, instead of pursuing the quest to maximize her own material interests, associate his economic behavior with a commitment to the community, act in the public social, economic, political arena, and place herself in relation to others in order to take care of the general common interest. And that's the mulier activa, because the idea was that this new economic agent should not be framed as a new homo. No? Many people are talking about the homo cooperans, the homo reciprocans. It's always an homo. It's never a woman. So what we said, maybe it's time to change also the language. Might be symbolic, but it is important in terms of also advancing a new approach to economy. The new economic agent, she's someone that acts in the common interest. It's not only, if we need to move away from the homo economicus, we also need to change the language of public policies. So, and that's the kind of the first most important, so distinguishing between open commons and shared commons, distinguishing between the homo economicus and the mulier activa, and from these two kind of main, let's say, design points, we need then to start digging into the sharing economy world and start talking about sharing economies rather than the sharing economy. Because as I said, if we have two different economic agents, if we have two different resources, then we don't have the sharing economy as a monolithic one thing that can be as treated as such. We need to start distinguishing between these models, between the sharing economy in the strict sense and collaborative forms of sharing economy that work more on the idea of collaboration and cooperation. Because what Uber and Airbnb are doing today as a market-based, which is completely fine, but it's crowd-based capitalism, as one scholar has said. It's still market-based capitalism. So we need to, understand that it's using just the kind of really let's say the mechanical approach of sharing, and building on this mechanical approach of sharing a crowd-based capitalism. So a structure of economic initiatives that are still rooted in the old paradigm. So if we start moving away from this sharing economy in the strict sense and leveraging more the approach of collaborative forms of sharing economy, then we realize that we need to foster, to stimulate, to incentivize, to even put our attention and also pretend that public policies and policymakers invest on these other forms of sharing economy rather than on these on these shared base only forms of sharing economy. So, which means that we need to understand what are these forms in which a peer-to-peer approach is built in the initiative, in the sharing economy initiative. What are the model of governance and control of the financial transaction, in which maybe sometimes the platform is used only as to connect individuals, but it's not used to promote local economy, local economic development, economic democracy. It's still, as Bowen said yesterday, a way to extract value from local communities and bring it, somewhere else. So we need to bring more to the attention of policymakers, especially at the local level, the concept of pooling economy as a sort of subcategory of sharing economy. I'll go back to this in a little while because I created a matrix that is more simple. So these are the four, basically, typologies of sharing economy. And you see that the first two, access and gig economy, are the kind of sharing economy in the strict sense that we framed as the on-demand economy. It's still working on the idea of consumption. It's using platforms, but it's not advancing the kind of approach that we are talking about here today. It's more, access economy, if you think about, the idea of the age of access. It's not anymore the age of possession. You don't need to possess things. You need to access to services. But someone is selling those services. So, okay, I don't need to own a car anymore. I can have an access to a car. I can share the resource. I can share the car with someone else. But the platform is still governed, is still owned by some, crowd-based capitalistic initiative, which is, again, fine, but it's not sharing economy as we intend to promote at the local level. And then you have gig economy. Think about TaskRabbit. It's a way to transform people into rabbits, rather than, it's not even the Homo economicus. It's a way to promote and to actually downplay also the role of the humankind, of a person. Is like new slavery in some way, because these people do some small services for other people that may need to have, to have other people do stuff for them. It's having an employee without paying, the wage for its and the social security and all the kind of conditions that you need to have. It's like really transforming its call center, but really in the real world. Do you know TaskRabbit? Have you ever heard about TaskRabbit? TaskRabbit is, for instance, the example that is usually made is, someone that is at home and doesn't want to or cannot go to the grocery store to buy her groceries. So she goes on the platform and she finds for someone else that is willing to do it, for a small amount of money. Now, this thing can be really nicely told, but think about, the trend that is triggering. It is transforming people into basically serfs of other people, because there are instances in which you have persons, workers that do not, invest on their studies, do not invest on their talents, on their capabilities, but they stop doing any other kind of, intellectual or, really high-value work to start being just giggers, to do gigs, small gigs, and that's it. It's not going to be, a way to really promote the flourishing of these people. It's a way to put these people in a situation of need, because how many of these how many people can really live off this kind of services? So on-demand economy with these two legs, access and gig economy, is very dangerous if it's not governed. if it's not, regulated. That's the point. This side of the sharing economy needs to be regulated, because you need to have, you need to make sure that this does not transform normal people into workers that do not have the same guarantees that they used to have in the market, in the previous market economy. Stop me if it's not clear, because this is, it's, let's make it as more interactive as possible. So we need to make sure that some of the conditions that were there before are still applied to this kind of ventures of the sharing economy. And then you have this other side of the sharing economy that can be framed as the pooling economy, which has to do with collaborative platforms, in which instead you have users that are in some way sharing the resources to co-produce. Think about fab labs, co-working spaces, in which you have a community that is the producer. It's not some digital platform governing in a non-transparent way the community. It's the community governing itself, or in some way creating new forms of. And then you have the pooling economy, in which the governance of the platform, of the local platform, is even more intense. The self-governance, in which either the management or the ownership of the platform is managed managed or owned by the community. So we extracted 10 sort of guidelines, principles that you need to follow. You might want to follow, and they are outlined in the document. Which is, first of all, you need to set the public policy objectives of any kind of policy that you want to design at the local level on sharing economy. So you need to understand, if you want to use sharing economy to promote environmental sustainability, social justice, local development, a better quality of life, you need to really focus on this kind. What is you really good? Because once you know that, then you can use and you leverage the previous existing policies in order to advance these kind of objectives. And also you are able to separate the sharing economy that you need to regulate from the sharing economies that you need to promote, foster, the kind of sharing economies we framed as pooling economy. Second of all, you need to deal with pre-existing markets and economies and unfair competition. And again, think about hotels and think about local, the local industry, in the local tourism industry, which is basically sustaining costs because they pay payrolls, they pay taxes at the local level. They in some way they are subject to local regulation on the environment, and sometimes they even do corporate social responsibility, take care of the. So these markets, they are markets, but these markets in some way are more rooted in local economies than these digital platforms. And so they are suffering from this kind of wave of sharing economy, because if you think about sometimes Airbnb or some people that use Airbnb, they don't pay taxes anymore sometimes. They don't pay wages to employees. And they can sometimes don't even care about the environment. And there are cities in which they don't care about first of all, also the kind of consequences that this is creating on cities. Most cities, if you think about tourist cities, the inner core of these cities, they have been transformed into sort of distributed hotel platform. What's the problem in this? The problem is that you are destroying the identity, you're destroying the community which made that place attractive. You are using the common resource as a commodity, and you are triggering a trend in which at the end you're not going to have basically any more Florence or Venice. Think about Venice. Venice is now, the center of Venice is just an open-air museum and an open-air hotel. And you have these private spaces competing with previous hotels that, this is creating tensions. But the most important thing is that it's emptying the DNA of the place. Venice was made by Venetians, but you don't have Venetians anymore. The number of inhabitants of Venice dropped down, and in fact, there is a beautiful essay on If Venice Dies. It's from Settis, who is an archaeologist, and he's a very well-known expert in cultural heritage. He's saying, we are destroying the real common, which was the community. And this is driving up also the prices of real estate in many cities. And this is creating a problem for students, for instance. So this is creating all rippling effects that we don't see today. Because students cannot afford to live close by, closer to the universities that usually are in the centers, because landlords, they prefer to, rent out to someone coming from 1 week from Australia. I'm talking about Italy, I'm making an example. Rather than, and they make the same amount of money that in 1 week they could make with 1 month rent from a student. Because sometimes they don't even have to care about regulations, no? Rent control regulation. There was a question here, no? Well, this is, depends on the city, but for sure this phenomenon, especially in touristy cities, is accelerating this process. It's boosting, at the speed that we don't even see now because we are not looking at the data, but this is actually accelerating this process. It was not happening before in Florence or in Venice. Rather, it was more, the pace was slower, but and also there was a cyclical, no? You have the inner cities emptying because you had this idea of people going. That was the kind of phenomenon you're making reference to. So people were moving out of the cores because they wanted to live in the suburbs. But now people should go back to the centers because of the cost of transportation, because cities are, creating, new agglomeration economies, and, the agglomeration economics can, foster, participation and, diminish. They can diminish the cost of living. No, instead of being outside in the suburbs, many American cities now are experiencing this kind of re-agglomeration in the core. But if in the core you find that you have a phenomenon that is instead raising the cost of living, because now, for instance, in New York, where Airbnb is the number of units that are rented by Airbnb through Airbnb is higher than the numbers of rooms that are rented through hotels, through Booking or through other platforms. That it's impressive. So the number one hotel in New York is Airbnb. It's not the agglomeration of all the hotels. Look at the data. It's impressive. What this is creating is also, because they are using private units, so it's creating a spike in the price of the rooms that were used to be rented by students or just low-income people in the city. Another question.
It's a complex issue. If you take here in Tenerife, so the hotels, they fight tooth and nail against Airbnb. Mm-hmm. And then what happens is that, for example, in the touristic areas, they have blocked the use of these platforms. So how is it done now? Well, simply by renting in England. Here, so the extractive process is done anyway, just as just black economy, and there is not the sufficient capacity for the tourist inspection to do that. So by not allowing platforms to exist, the result is that there are all these many thousands of owners that have a big chunk of the rooms available, for example, in the south, and they're just done outside from this territory, and there's no tax recovered from that, and there's no return.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, if you take La Laguna, you have old houses that cannot be transformed into modern houses, but now in some of those, instead of being just empty, they have managed to do this thing with renting rooms. It's not adapted to we don't have the concept now large families that live together. You cannot really transform the buildings so that many people can live there. And this has brought somehow some life inside the city's center, the historic center. So it's somehow a balance that has to be found where how much, and I think that's what they're doing in Barcelona, how much can you allow for vacational purposes and how much you have to keep for normal rent for local inhabitants.
I'm not saying, of course, that first 2 points. I'm just trying to stress the line because I want people to see the dark side. That it's not all, this rosy world that, sharing economy can bring and is bringing real problems. And I'm not saying that, of course, taxi drivers and the accommodation industry that is, perfect, no? What I'm trying to say is both, that we need to be aware of the distinction, because as I will say in a little while, we need to regulate one and promote the other, because this is, if we understand that the other side of the sharing economy is a sharing economy that is social-based and is promoting also social values, then we can convince, and we have legal arguments to say that public investment should be made on this and not on other things, okay? So that we need to use the regulation to make sure that rules are applied if they are, working within the old paradigm. They need to stick to the rules of the old paradigm. No, it's a market needs to be regulated. The pooling economy instead should be promoted because it's not a market, it's a new way of producing value, okay? The other thing is that, the point that I want to make is that, pre-existing markets are kind of, need to understand the importance of, at some point, also embracing this paradigm. They need to understand that they need to rethink their business models if they don't want to be swept away. And that they need to start working with other actors. That's why I say that the private local actor is one of the 5 actors that we need to have at the local level to create new forms of governance. No? Because, of course, they have been, most of them, they have been, reasoning in the, with the old approach. I just try to maximize my profit, and I don't care whatever happens outside of my doors. Now they are seeing the problem, and they are the ones who cannot leave the land, who cannot leave the place. They are the local economy. So if they don't want to be substituted totally by some, Airbnb that is going to manage, they need to come up with new solutions, and they need to work with the, the practitioners, the activists, and the local policymakers in order to find ways to promote the creation of local economic circuits in some way, no? In which you can have, because what this is creating is a sort of, they are very smart because they are creating a sort of tension within local populations. Because now you're going to have the hosts that support, or the Uber drivers that support the community of, the local community of giggers, Uber drivers, and Airbnb hosts that support this version of the local economy and advocate for them. They even run campaigns. Uber called up on their community in some cities to say, you should defend Airbnb or Uber because the local government wants to prevent us to do our business. So they are creating a tension within local population. They're creating conflicts. So that's why I say that the local entrepreneurs should understand this and should prevent these conflicts from happening and should start thinking also their local, their business models. Even real estate developers are now at risk. Most of the real estate in New York now is traded online. It's not traded, on local platforms. Saskia Sassen talks about this in Expulsions and in her last book and in an article that she wrote, in which she says that basically urban land is becoming a commodity because they don't even care about what is happening they don't even care about buying real estate they just care about trading online these assets that are in urban areas or in local collectivities, local territories. So we need to come up with the solutions that are from the ground, from below. And I see that there is a lot to do by involving local entrepreneurs because they are at risk as much as local communities.
So one thing is that there is no alliance between the traditional bigger operators and the smaller operators that get involved within this sharing economy. So there's a fight to shut down the emerging sharing economy, but I think the main disadvantage, and that competition authorities don't even get into because it's beyond their remit, is taxation. So if now I booked for some of the speakers, since hotels were full, Airbnb. I tried to get in contact, get the phone number of the hosts, and they block it. They don't want people to get in touch, and yes. Even if you write it in letters, they filter it out, and so there's a fine if they think that you have then canceled because you've done it on your own. You get sanctioned. Maybe you don't get to continue. So, and the tax. So the commission that they take is out of the taxation. So this is not taxed in Spain, for example. The fact that the local business are taxed here and they have to pay, and somebody else has a model that doesn't have to pay, is a huge regulatory advantage that makes it more profitable for them.
Yeah. So this is the point that is related to basically the data, the sharing economy data. Who owns it? How it is used? How it can be useful for public policies at the local level to understand if there is too much, sharing economy in one area that you need some local authorities are capping the number of units that can be put on these platforms. No, they're saying it's too much in this area, or they're saying maybe in this area you don't have to have units on Airbnb. You can have it only in certain areas. So that's the point about data. Data is the new asset. So this can create, first of all, imbalances in economic power. Because, of course, some of these platforms have accumulated so much data that no other platform is going to be able to collect as much data as they have right now. So there is even a problem of, within the market. It's not true that antitrust regulation cannot do anything, because now you have concentrated power in some platforms because they have reached an amount of data, an amount of outreach that can prevent any other, or make it very difficult, any other sharing economy, in the strict sense, operator, come in and say, I'm going to compete with you. So there is no competition, even in the competitive world of sharing economy, because you have these imbalances in economic power. Why? Because they own the data. So that brings to the point of data-driven regulation, that you need to push this platform to put the data that they have, which is data relating to the local communities, at disposal of the local authorities. Because this is good. So once you have the knowledge that they have, then you can design and draft regulation that can, say, you need this here, but you cannot do it there. This is creating a problem. So you need to have, a sort of way to look through what is happening, thanks, or because of these platforms. So then you have also data protection, because what is the authority that can really, interact on data protection? Sensible data and so on, so on and so on. So this is another issue that, it cannot be dealt also at the local level. Trust and reputation management. Of course, most of these, as we said, platforms deal with trust and reputation. So the reputation of an host can make a difference on these platforms if someone has said that was not happy with my hosting services, no? Who is the referee? Who is going to decide? For now, it's only let's say the platform. But can you deal with someone that is somewhere else, maybe in India or maybe, so it's like, the management of this reputation is in private hands. And the other thing is about reputation portability. So in the sense that your reputation is basically your currency. So you need to be able to subject yourself to another, kind of authority, independent authority or independent platform, better if it's, peer-to-peer, community-owned platform that manages this sort of conflicts instead of having the private operator sort, because you are a small dot against a giant. And then you have the point around, workers and conditions and all other, public well-being, and the tax problem with municipal tax that has to be dealt with. The eighth point is that really what these platforms are doing is externalizing many costs that the old firms, used to have inside, no? Because again, if you think about the price of a wage, the cost of a wage, they're basically externalizing social security. They are not paying social security, they are imposing an extra cost on social security because all these people that are working on this platform, they are users. They are not part of the production chain, no? They are part of the community. So why should the platform pay for social security? Because they are prosumers, no? They are production, they are producing. Instead, they are part of the chain value that they have created. They were smart at basically externalizing a lot of costs. Also the management of these spaces. So the condition, the security conditions, like if it's and compliant with the fire department or sanitation department requirements. This is all concerns that they externalized. If you are an hotel, you have to deal with this kind of regulations. This is a cost that you embed in your production. Okay. So to go, to the last 2 points, basically, what you need to work on is creating this collaborative institutional ecosystem at the local level, because this is the first time that a digital innovation, a big innovation in the economic paradigm is happening at the local level. So Google had to deal with federal or national regulators. Think about it. This time, they are dealing only with small local regulators. And of course, already Google is a strong giant, and so they can deal, and they're even more powerful than national and federal regulators. Think about, the kind of asymmetries in power between these platforms and your cities and your municipalities. It's not the power, the power structure is imbalanced. So what you can do is, you need to do is create this institutional ecosystem in which it's not just the local government dealing with this, but you need to have, the other actors. And then start local sharing economy agenda, which promote the kind of pooling economy, the sharing economy, the version of the sharing economy that promotes social values, that keeps the value in the community. It's not extractive, and you need to build around this ecosystem a plan to produce partnerships at the local level on specific projects, like the example that I made, local economic circuits that can foster a new idea, a new version, a different version of the sharing economy. Thank you.